Welcome to the Bladtcast. Very excited. Joining me now is musician Mark Slaughter. We're going to talk about a variety of things, but they've got a great vinyl box set for Slaughter's Fear No Evil album. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. Welcome back to the show, Mark. Great to talk to you.
Thank you. Yeah, nice to be back.
So let's just start off. We're going to dive right into it. So the Fear No Evil album, which was Slaughter's third album, that was released just a little bit over 26 years ago. And
Right.
I admit that I hadn't listened to the album in a while, and I listened to it a lot in the past week or so to get ready to talk to you. And you just kind of forget because, when I think of Slaughter, I'm going to think of the songs that I still hear, on Sirius XM's Hair Nation, the Stick It To You songs every once in a while, Wildlife, and any of the stuff after that you don't hear as much. But it was great to listen again because it was like almost as though it was new because I hadn't heard it in so long, and I forgot how many great songs there were on there. And I wanted to just remembering, going back decades, listening to that song, It'll Be All Right, I think is what it's called. It's got this really cool Beatles vibe. And then that vocal is sort of it's like that talking vocal from Day in the Life, but it's like mixed with like Alice Cooper. And it was just like, oh my God, I just hadn't thought about that song in a long time. So it's kind of fun to get to rediscover stuff like that, which I guess when people get this new version of it, they'll be able to rediscover some forgotten favorites maybe.
Right. The bottom line is we're influenced by all these artists along the way, whether it be Alice Cooper, Beatles, Zeppelin, Sabbath, AC/DC, Aretha Franklin. I mean, it's so diverse, and then you just kind of put it in a blender, and that's really ultimately what the band is. It's a lot of those things just put together, and that song is probably one of the most Beatlesque of all of them. And there is a day in a life type thing in there, and I think it's just kind of tip of the hat to where we came from, and it's kind of what we heard in our head again from listening to all those records a million years ago, and it's certainly like I said, it's part of our music environment, so it's definitely going to creep its way in.
No, and I think it's fun because it's not like every Slaughter album has, here's the Beatles sounding song, so it's kind of cool every once in a while to get something like that. I've talked to a number of musicians whose career really ascended in the late 80s and early 90s, from the hard rock scene. And when I spoke to you a few years ago, you sort of had like the most Zen-like way to look at sort of what happened to that scene. You said like, well, we shouldn't be mad at any of these bands, like Alice in Chains, Soundgarden put out great albums.
Great bands. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, these are great bands that put out great albums. And since then, I've read something that you said that I actually just didn't, I literally had no idea about that. Sure, musical tastes change, but there was I guess a fundamental changeover at MTV. And suddenly somebody in charge is like, I hate Motley Crue. I don't like these bands anymore. We're not going to play them. And then basically that's kind of what happened, right?
It was a programmer from a station called K-Rock, which is out there in California that you probably hear. And that station, it was a programmer of that station who in turn ended up being the programmer of MTV. And he said, I'm just not going to play these bands anymore. And again, there's phases in life. There's flavors of the week, but it becomes a nostalgia thing, and I think that's a key point with what we do. We are in control of our own music. We make our own music. We recorded it. We wrote it. We're the only band from our genre that had that total control from front to end, and still do, and perform it still to this day. So it's not like other people were leading our destiny of where we were going to be. It was just, again, we still feel comfortable because it's who we are. We weren't putting on an act. We were just, this is just the guys next door who love music, and this is what they wrote and this is what they play. And I think that's a key point with our band.
Yeah, and it's interesting because sort of that realization that there's definitely like a cool kids table in rock and roll. I mean, it's no more well evidenced than the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, where they begrudgingly after years it's like, all right, I guess Kiss can get in, and all right, I guess Def Leppard, but I really didn't want. Oh my God, Bon Jovi. They let in these bands, these great bands that all you
Sure.
have to do is look at how successful they were. And, I mean, especially if you point back to Kiss, who it's like all these other bands like are influenced by them. And that's
Right.
supposed to be one of those factors. It's like, oh, were you a huge influence? But then it's just like, yeah, but I don't like that band. And I feel like, coming up in the time you did sort of this hard rock era, and a lot of people who are familiar with this kind of music, they know Eddie Trunk, who has a show on Sirius XM, and he is one of the most vocal people who does not like to use the phrase hair metal or hair bands or anything like that. And I think when you paint with that brush, it becomes so much easier to dismiss those bands. So I feel like, great albums like the ones that Slaughter had, at a certain point, it was just like, yeah, we're not even going to listen to it and evaluate whether or not it's good, And,
Right.
And I feel like, that time period that Fear No Evil came out was sort of, yes, there was a little bit of a sea change in terms of what was popular. But if you have people who are saying like, well, we're just not going to play those. And I know Fear No Evil kind of comes out around the same time that Skid Row have this great album called Subhuman Race. Tesla have this album Bust a Nut. I could list 10 more. And it was just like almost, no real reaction. Not like the second Skid Row record like debuted at #1 on Billboard. And then the third one, it was like, oh no, we don't even want to put that on the shelf. So talk about how challenging it was in that time to come out with a record that I'm sure you guys were like, oh, we made another great record. I listened to it just yesterday and it was great, So
yeah,
there's nothing wrong with the record.
There's nothing wrong with the record. It's just a different time. I think that the drum sound, that's the best drum sound we had on all our records, in my opinion. It's a great Blossus drum sound, amazing on that record. It was a very, look, when we did Stick It To You, that was, Dana and I writing and then us doing it in the studio. And again, our first live date that we ever did was with Kiss. So you get, when we started playing live. So there became a new flavor to the band because we never played live together. We wrote it and recorded it, did it all in the studio, but we never really played in a room together, going over the songs. We just did it all in the studio. That's what we know. That's where we came from. So it was a whole different animal when we stepped on the stage. And I think that's what you see in the Fear No Evil. That's after Stick It To You and touring for a year and a half with Kiss and Poison, and then coming back and then doing Wildlife, and then going out with Ozzy Osbourne, and then Damn Yankees, and then going back and then writing, and then Dana got in a motorcycle accident, and we had the record in the the ideas in a can, and then we saw our record company changing. So there's all these changes within the industry as well. Our label was going through a massive change. Chrysalis was becoming EMI, or was being swallowed up by EMI, and Chris Wright, who's a brilliant, man who started Chrysalis Records along with Terry Ellis back in the day. He was no longer, he was kind of forced out. It was a hostile buyout. And so you lose the flavor, you lose that family, you lose what that team that you built, and everybody knew each other. So there's a lot of spokes in the wheel for our band and how it changed. But then again, we were playing arenas and all that, and then all these bands were pushed down into clubs because it wasn't on MTV, it wasn't cool. So then the promoters are like, we just don't do that anymore. It was just kind of like, every bit, all of a sudden that was just gone. And it was hard. The touring was a lot harder. It was a lot more brutal, but we hopped on a bus every year and we slugged it out. But inevitably, Fear No Evil to me was a very difficult time, but the record is a good record in my opinion. And I think we wanted to put it out on vinyl because it's never been out on vinyl. And, the Kiss My Wax records, they're doing the box set, which I think there's only 500 of them. I think there's only 100 left out of
Yeah,
the
so
500.
yeah, so of those 500, about 400 have already been spoken for. And
They're
for those that are
gone. Yeah,
watching, you
they're
can see
gone.
it on the screen there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll go through some of the cool stuff that's on there. But yeah, go to kissmywaxrecords.com, and I know those guys from their presence online. As the name of their site is Kiss My Wax because they do a podcast, and I
Yeah.
first became aware of them because at auction they paid some obscene amount for the video for Kiss's song "I" from Music from the Elder. They did a promo video, and there was like one copy of it, and so these guys bought it, and then they were able to put it on the internet because they owned it. And I don't know what they spent. As a huge Kiss fan, I think that whatever they spent, it was too much. But I'm glad I got to see it because they bought it.
Right. Right.
So how did how did this idea come about to do a record with those guys and put it out through their site?
Well, Jason, we know Jason and Joe, and they approached us on it, along with a childhood friend of mine, Pat Lucero, that I've known. We grew up together, and it was just a natural course of it, and it's being done properly. So it's not just coming through a record company; it's coming through the band. So we are finding special things. We're finding, pictures that weren't ever printed before, and album cover ideas that nobody's ever seen. I mean, stuff that we forgot all about. They're just plugged in and really making it a very special thing. And then Dana and I started going through the archives during the pandemic and started finding demos and the original recordings and the DATs so that it will be remastered properly. And, it's done properly for an album. It's not like we're just taking it off some, MP3 recording and throwing it on vinyl. It's a really superb sounding record. On top of it, we threw our demos on that, the demos of some of the songs on there. So
yeah, and as a testament to the fact that everybody wanted it to sound good, so it's 2 LPs and they're at 45 RPM. So obviously, right. I think the album itself, I assume, would have fit on a 33, but then it's going to sound so much better. And then there's the 9 rare or never before heard bonus tracks that are on there. And there's some pictures and stuff. And we'll go through some of the other things. But in terms of actually remastering it, I was reading that I guess somebody associated with the project sought out someone named, I think his name's Major Applebaum.
Moore. Yeah.
Oh, Moore. Okay. And he had, I looked him up, and, he had worked with Dream Theater, Faith No More, Yes, Meatloaf, and God bless him, he even mastered a William Shatner record,
Right.
William Shatner puts out those music, where he kind of talk sings
without Adam Hamilton. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like, if you want to have a big smile on your face, this is for the audience. Go ahead and Google William Shatner space trucking. But in any case, so talk about getting somebody that obviously has worked with, a lot of that stuff I think is reissuing, making sure that somebody who understands what you need to do to go through and make it sound better than it did.
And Bob Ludwig did the first, the first 2 records. We did those with Bob Ludwig, and he's amazing. But those are for CD, and it was a different format. It's a different mastering, limiting, and this is for album. This is for an album. So we have the box set that's being done this way, as well as our demos. And then on top of that, there's just the album version of it. So it's not just the box set, but it's the album. But both of them will sound incredibly good. And that's the key point that we wanted to do, is to put it out there, time capsule it almost for ourselves in that side, that it will be done properly. And I think that's a key point with it. It's just not going to be thrown out there for a money grab, because there's really, at the end of the day, with what we're putting into this thing, there was really not much money left.
Right. Yeah. And it's signed by all 3 surviving members of Slaughter. And it's in a cool box. And hand numbered. That's always good. And then what I really wanted to talk about was there's this cool extra special item that one of the 500 is going to have this golden ticket, this Spend My Life with Slaughter, which is a lifetime pass to see the band live for the life of the band. So my question to you is, when you got into music, did you think that one day you would also get to play Willy Wonka?
I guess it's the young kids and how we look at things. We always try to look at things of what we think would be cool.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that's really where we're at with it. Wouldn't it be cool if we did this? And guys that kiss my wax are like, yeah, that'd be cool if you want to do that,
Yeah.
But it comes from the band. In other words, we were willing to do that. And Dana and Bloss and myself are all going to be in the same room and sign all these things together. They're going to come up to Nashville and we'll sign it all in the same room. So it's not going to be just like things floating around. There's a camaraderie there. There's a lot of good memories. And I think that's the key point with this is it's there's a lot of love put into it. And that's and we enjoy that.
Yeah, look, I think that most of us have bought reissues that are record company reissues where, the band may or may not even be involved. And this is clearly the opposite of that. It's
right.
Sometimes, those kind of reissues have stuff that the band would probably rather not be on there, demos that don't sound good. So it's great that, you guys are taking the time. And I think the important thing to note is I found it fascinating in the notes that I was sent is that the sets are expected around September because I guess the backlog for producing vinyl is something like 4 or 5 months. It's not
right.
Just there's I guess only so many places.
There's only
right?
so many. Yeah. Cause what happened is when vinyl went away, they destroyed a lot of those presses. They just went away. So you have all these records that were being printed and then it becomes like an antique. And then they fall apart or they're not maintained. And there's just basically just a few that are doing that now. So that's why they're backed up. And it's also 900% increase in people buying vinyl. It's actually outselling CDs at this point. So go figure.
Yeah, I know. I think probably the majority of people are like, oh, there's a new album. I'm going to just hit this button on my iPhone and then walk around with it, And,
right.
Yeah, I think that the one good thing about CDs is that you can take that actual disc and then, transfer it to however you want it. But obviously for sound, somebody's really going to be able to sit home and enjoy it with a nice pair of headphones. This is clearly what that's going to be for.
This is for the audiophiles. Yeah, that's
absolutely.
For the guys who really get into the vinyl and having it sound warmer and for, the dynamics. The thing is that people don't understand is a CD is the level. If you're looking at the level of where it's at, it's just slammed. It's called brick wall mastering, where you just kind of slam it like this and then it stays at this point. So it's louder all the time, but the waves themselves are actually compressed. So it becomes distortion. A square wave technically is distortion. So when you're listening to that, there's a square wave. Same thing with MP3s. With vinyl, there's the breathing room. It's doing this. So it's the lows are low and the highs are highs. It's not like completely squashed for that because you're allowing that in vinyl.
It's interesting because you're making me remember how CDs used to have this little box with 3 letters on it, and it would be very rarely would it be DDD, digital all the way across. Like you're old, like if you bought like an old Doors album, it would, of course, the original would be A for analog, but very few of them would be all digital. And you mentioned Damn Yankees before, and I remember that first Damn Yankees album, it was like but you always wonder like if somebody's gonna go back and remaster any of those things, what they would sound like. We're talking about different formats. I wanted to bring in this comment from Kame Egan. I loved Stick It To You. I listened to that album so much, I had to buy a new cassette because the tape got twisted and ripped. That was the format that I had Stick It To You on initially. I had it on cassette, and cassettes were great because they were portable, but boy, they were not durable, like at all.
No, no. If you hit just the right median or whatever, your tape would just hit the head and it would get all, next thing you know, you had tape everywhere. So it was, I've had many tapes lost through that.
And it's, it would be, you wouldn't even have to listen to it that many times. So it would be like that space between the songs. You could hear the other side of the tape, like backwards, because you listened to it so much. So,
right.
there's I can understand people rediscovering vinyl for the audio quality. It's but when somebody puts out a new cassette, I think that it's mostly as a goof, but I have a fondness for it, even though it was not a great format.
Right.
Because I bought
Well,
so many albums.
8-track doesn't seem to be the format that anybody's screaming about at this point. That one went out quick.
Yeah, although I do remember somewhere in the last decade, I know Cheap Trick put their newest album out on 8-track because they wanted to be the number one selling something.
Yeah.
And so there's always somebody out there that you can figure out something.
Question is how many did they sell?
If it was two, they were still number one.
Yeah, exactly. I need to call Rick and ask him.
Yeah. Or does he have a garage full of like 5,000 of them?
Right, exactly.
Come over and take them.
Exactly.
In terms of preparing for getting to talk to you again, I also re-listened to The Wildlife, which I hadn't heard in a little while, the whole album. And, it's easy to kind of think of like, oh my God, the 90s came and hard rock was over. But that album came out in 92. And it was incredibly successful as well. I only know this because I looked it up, but it went to number 8 on the charts, and I'm like, that's 1992. That's after Nirvana and Pearl Jam. So there was still a market if it wasn't for people like the guy you talked about at MTV or people at record companies that were just like, nah, let's just find somebody else.
Yeah, let's just move on. Yeah.
And I was listening to this song, and I'd kind of forgotten about this song, Times They Change, which is kind of like a time capsule because it's got these clips of like then President Bush Sr. and I think Tom Brokaw, and talking about the Gulf War. And and I was thinking about it, I'm like, that's such like almost like a Queensryche thing. They would a lot of times put like somebody like with like a newscast over like a solo or something, and it's such a time capsule to that very moment. I'm like, I kind of forgot that like the Gulf War was this really scary thing in that moment. I was in high school, and I remember like our teachers, like we didn't really learn that day. They wanted to talk to us and know what we were thinking, and just because of everything that's happened since, it's so easy to forget like, oh yeah, that was a really big deal, that there was a war, and
we were caught in the crossfire of it. We were in Europe at the time that it happened. We were just starting a tour with Cinderella, and we are driving in a double-decker tour bus in the wrong side of the road. And then the BBC there said, U.S. has just declared war on Kuwait. And, we're just like, what? And it's almost like one of those old broadcasts or one of those black and white movies you watch when you're a kid, because we didn't live through that. I mean, it was Vietnam and all that, but that was that, and this is this, and it was very, very bizarre. And that tour was cut short. We came back into America and spent the rest of our time here, unfortunately.
And in terms of sort of like, this is a very technical sort of nerdy question. How difficult was it to get clips like that back then? In the late 80s, years after that, I was an intern at Saturday Night Live, and a big part of my job was finding these agencies that like taped everything, and you had to get shows that had aired in the past. And because you couldn't, people now, it's like I could pick up my iPhone and I could probably find the entire NBC nightly news from the night that Kuwait was invaded. But at that time, how hard was it to do that? And talk about the idea of, hey, we want to do this. Oh, can we even get stuff that actually works in there?
Well, what we did is we ended up I remember we were recording at the Red Zone, and I went into Studio A and literally went on the nightly news and plugged my DAT player into the back of the television and recorded it on my portable DAT. We brought it in and found clips of things that we thought were right. And then we had to go get the clearance after we had used it. So we had to go to Tom Brokaw, and Tom Brokaw was like, yeah, that's fine. I'd love to do it. And next thing you know, we have him on, and then we got the clearance from NBC. But I think that really music is a time capsule. It's just like Sikachia is really that a little bliss before it was a little bit simpler time. It started getting a little bit more complicated in 91, even more so in 92, and then we're here where we are right now. But certainly I think what we were trying to document in Time Capsule is those things that we were going through, and as people, not just as an artist. And that was our way of really, putting it into a record. And the nice part of it is we were the producers, so we were able to go into that and change it and do what we wanted. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we do this? Well, let's just do it. So we would do those ideas, and we would have those ideas, and it was with the band, and we were able to artistically do what we wanted. And that was the how should I put it? That was probably the blessing of this band from the beginning, is the fact that we had that artistic control from the beginning. And we really did. They just said, yeah, you guys do what you want to do. And they come in some of the demos, we'd send them a couple songs. That's great. Go ahead and record it up. They never said, hey, why don't you change this? Or why don't you try that? Or you don't have any songs. They just said, you go guys, go. And so we really had a lot of artistic freedom. And I think it's sad to me that a lot of these bands that were signed, that were and are good bands, they had somebody in A&R that just wanted to touch it or change things just to say that they changed something, instead of letting the band that they signed for the reason that they liked the band, they would sign them and then try to change everything about them that they liked. It's odd. It doesn't make any sense.
And I was actually thinking about that just as you were talking. So how is it that, Slaughter, their first album comes out in 1990. How are you able to get that kind of autonomy? I mean, obviously people know that the band grew out of the Vinnie Vincent invasion,
yeah,
but that obviously that this would not be that record contract. So is it just that the band is like, the label's like, we want to do a new band, but without Vinnie?
They gave us artistic freedom. They said I signed a leaving member agreement during the time I was with Vinnie, which means that whatever, if any, it's really Steve Stevens. I'll say that all day long. If it wasn't for Steve Stevens, I wouldn't have had that deal, because Steve Stevens left Billy Idol, and it caused panic through the whole record label, that the people that were underneath the artists were just as important. So they made everybody sign a leaving member agreement. So I'm out on the road. I called up Mike Bone, who's the president at that time, and I said, look, it's, this thing is not going to work. Vinnie has totally different ideas of where we're going, and where he's going and where we're going are two totally different directions. We want to write songs that become a part of people's lives. And Vinnie wanted to be a guitar hero. And again, he writes great songs, but that's what he wanted to do. Artistically, we were just in a fork in the road. So at that time, I told Mike, I said, I'll finish up the tour, and then we'll see what happens. And as soon as we finished the tour, I got back home, and literally in my mailbox was a letter from the attorney from Chrysalis saying, we are picking up your leaving member agreement. Now you need to go record 4 songs. That was the part of the stipulation in the contract, that you have to come up with 4 songs that they listen to. And if they like what you're doing, they'll pick up your option. So they said they were picking up my option already, but we had to write the songs. We had to record the songs. And basically we rolled right into doing the Slaughter record. First, we worked with a band called White Heat, pretty much about 2 weeks after, and they came out, and we worked with them on some of the production ideas. We kind of used their time in the studio that was paid for to do some of our artistic ideas. And we, did that. Dana produced that record, and I was part of helping in that side. And that was a band called Firehouse. And those songs were recorded that way. They couldn't get a deal. We go out on the road, and subsequently we're out on the road, and they said, okay, they're picking up the deal. Dana had the option to produce them, but he was on the road. We were doing our thing. I mean, we were right in our heyday. So he said, I can't do it. So
he would have produced the Firehouse record, which obviously had 2 huge songs. And so, that's crazy.
Demos are a testament to, the recording process. So the recording process and how we did things was good, and people knew that it was good. And the record label, when we did our demos for Stick It To Ya, it sounded like a record. So we knew what we were doing as we did it. And of course, we, again, going back to the 4 songs, they heard, 4 of the 6 songs that we recorded in our, as a demo. That was 1988, going on 99. It was New Year's Eve. We were in the studio at the record plant, and we recorded there, and just spent the night, and then spent the following evening, and that was it. And they said, okay, well, you guys know what you're doing. And we said, listen, we don't want A&R involved in this because they're going to change everything that we're doing. Otherwise, we don't want to do the deal. So we kind of set the precedence right there that let us do what we do, and we'll do this. Otherwise, this is not an agreement that we want to do.
Yeah, and it's not something that I think that you hear about a lot, is sort of picking up your option. You hear about that in terms of like television or
right.
Athletes and things like
right.
that. So getting that opportunity, it seems like it's a very unique circumstances that you guys found yourselves in. But obviously,
it gave us artistic control.
Then when you have the success of the first record, then they're able to say like, well, see, obviously it worked. Let's let them do what they want.
When are you guys going back in the studio? Exactly. When you're going back in the studio, and we had 1 month off between touring our butts off for a year and a half.
Right.
We had one out, and then Dana said, look, we got to strike while the iron's hot. And I said, okay. So we had literally 1 month off to like get our, I bought a car. I didn't even have a car because we were gone the whole time. My car was stolen. My car was stolen before we went out on the road. I had an MR2 that was stolen. So, I got my insurance check, and I said, why am I going to buy a car until I get back off the road? So it's like a year and a half. I had no car. So I would fly home and just, rent a car. But, and I'm like, okay, now I'm here. Let's go get our automobile. So, it was a good slush fund for
my friend Dan is in the chat, and he mentions that his first concert, it was my second ever concert, was to see Slaughter open for Kiss on the Hot in the Shade tour. And so Slaughter, we were late, we missed Little Caesar. You were the first band he ever saw, and he really didn't know the song, because it was like, I think, Up All Night. He actually thought this, I remember this, he thought the song Up All Night, that you guys were singing Rock All Night, and he's like, great song. I'm like, yeah, but you got the words wrong, dummy. But so, and he did the same thing I did, though. It's like we both like went and bought that cassette the next day. And you were saying something earlier, though, that you really didn't play until you were opening for Kiss. Now, had you done like no shows, or did you do a couple warm-ups or something?
No, the band, Slaughter never played a show at a club. We did a rehearsal for about a week of just like trying to get our guitar tones and get everybody playing, to get used to playing again. And again, when you record stuff, it's like you record it and then you've played it once. We're writing and recording. It's a point of doing it and making your art. And then when you go to play it live, it's like, okay, now we have to recreate the art. What did we do? What colors did we use? Which brushes did you use? And that's really where we're at going into that. So our first show that we did was May 4th. In Lubbock, Texas, 1990. That was our very first show and our very first performance. We came off the stage. The record company president was in our dressing room with gold records for all of us. So it was like, wow. I mean, it's like, I turned to Dana. I said, I think we did something right.
Yeah. Well, that's how easy it is, kids. That's how everybody was able to make it. Your first show, you get your gold record, and
right. Well, you know what? It was a time, and to be honest with you, we didn't have a life. We were in the studio. We were writing. We were working with other bands. Even in VVI time, Dana was producing other acts and other things, and that's what we love to do. And I continued to do that. The band hasn't recorded since 1999, and I just kept recording and doing stuff for television. And then I did a couple of solo records just because, I had the material and was writing for it. I just love the art of making music. Again, it's like you said, where is the art anymore and where's the money in it? It comes a point where you make music or you do your art because you love to do it instead of just a money grab. And I think that's a key point.
Yeah, no, I think that there is that clear distinction, and you did make the point that Slaughter hasn't recorded an album in now it's more than 20 years now, and
Yeah.
I've talked to you about a couple of solo albums you've done. I remember one's called Halfway There, that's
Right.
from a few years ago. But do you feel like that's the outlet that you get is to put out solo albums, and it's just not something that collectively Slaughter wants to do an album at this point? Or
No, I think it's that we want, when we're doing something for Slaughter, I think that we want to make it special. And it needs to be done right. It needs to be done, the proper way. And I just think that people throw out records and then it's just thrown out there. Even though I didn't just throw out my solo records, but it's the same type of thing. I think you really need to get involved in the music and the ideas of it and structure those ideas and put it out in the right way. So, for the band, I'm sure we'll do something, but at this point, it's not on the forefront of anything we're doing. I'm working right now with an incredibly talented artist named Mark Farner, who's
from
guitar
Grand
player.
Funk Railroad, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful human being, iconic singer, guitar player, and just fantastic guy to work with. He came into the studio here and we wrote a couple songs, and there's a lot more that we're going to be doing together on this. And I don't know, and he doesn't know where we're going to go with it, but I just know that when I listen back and he listens back to it, that it's something special. And I think it's the love of the music, and it's also the fact that I'm not trying to change who he is as an artist and how I'm recording him. I'm trying to make it seem like where it was, using the proper reverbs, for instance, that were used in 1970. So the tone and the quality of it is more old school than a 9 Inch Nails version of it, or something that's different in that side.
Yeah. So, and in terms of, Slaughter still, I see that there are some shows coming up, some festivals and things like that. And you can go to slaughterusa.com to see those. And, or I think it was actually earlier this week, I heard you on with Eddie Trunk, and I'm not trying to get a scoop or anything, but it seemed like you're not opposed to the idea of maybe at some point doing one of those tours where you guys would do an entire album. I've seen a few bands do that, and I think that's always a fun way to do it is, when you get to see, I've seen a variety of bands, like Springsteen's done it. I've seen Weezer do it. The Presidents of the United States of America did their debut album, and it's a lot of like, oh, that's cool. I like that idea. Now, if you ever did do that, are there songs that all these years later you actually never played live? And you're like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
There's a lot on that record, but I think that's the thing, is that the last time we probably played is when we tracked it,
right.
Gave me your heart. We never played it live. There's multiple songs on that record. We never did You Are the One. But I think it's again, we want to approach it on what the people want, not just what we want. And I think that because we're music fans and we love, for instance, I'm a fan of Mark Farner, what he's done and does, or Kiss or whatever. I listen to those bands as a listener who loves that. And I think that's the key point, is I want to do our music with the same type of fan interest of our own music, that we're not going far left when we should be going right here.
Yeah, one of the shows that I'm just remembering now that I saw was Ace Frehley did his '78 solo album, and he told us, like the crowd, he was like, "Yeah, there's 4 of these songs that I haven't played since I recorded them." So he's kind of like apologized in advance. Well, they all sounded great, but still, I get it. It's like, oh yeah, I haven't. You don't usually have the opportunity.
You record it, and usually, the other side of it is that people don't realize, unless it's your own show, for a 50-minute to an hour show, you usually are trying to sum up your whole career. And if you've got, 6, 7 albums, of music, there's all these songs to pick from. So how do you do that? You really go to the songs that people say, I love that, or you look at your statements to see what songs people are listening to and playing. So we've always gone to our statements because we figured if they're downloading it or looking at it or streaming it or whatever, at least we know what it is that the fans want or are listening to, as opposed to us trying to push a song that was not really a special song to them.
Sure. But
You know,
revisiting Fear No Evil the way you are now, and again, people can go to kissmywaxrecords.com to pre-order the special edition. Do you have any inkling of like, oh, wow, maybe we could try and, sneak in this one or that one because, we are celebrating this album now.
we might, but again, when you're playing a show, a promoter wants you to play 50 minutes to 70 minutes. So what do we put in there that the audience goes, I get it. This is an obscure record that we were very proud of. And for those audiophile people that really wanted to get into listening to something was recorded very well, but some people are just unaware of it. That's what we're doing here. We're presenting something forward to say, this is for you. And it's also for our own time capsule, because we're real proud of where we came from with that. And the way we're doing this is done proper. The box set's amazing. It's all done, with a lot of love, and instead of just, a get rich program, which a lot of, artists do these things. So that's not what this is about.
Yeah, and look, I've been in audiences where, like I've gone to see Aerosmith and been shocked that people aren't as excited as I am to hear Lord of the Thighs or Kings and Queens, So it's like,
but you can see that everybody else around you, the energy just drops, and you kind of go,
what?
Oh, why is that? Because they're not going crying. They just want the hits. They want the hits. And there's nothing wrong with that. But us metalheads and people who like the deep tracks, there's only so deep you can go before you start losing the energy. And as a performer, you just start seeing the energy go like this. It's because that's not what their head's at. They want that, oh yeah, I love this song. They don't get it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I've heard enough interviews with bands where they talk about like they're proud of new music that they do make, but they don't really play it live because it's like, well, that's when you see like the line of people to go to the bathroom or go buy a beer or whatever. So it's you don't want to do that to yourself.
It's so funny you should say that, because I remember Dana and I were at a Paul McCartney concert, and he's playing a Beatles track, and like, oh my God, what a great song. And then he plays a Wings song. Oh man, that's so great. And he goes, I'd like to do a new number for you. And I'm standing next to Dana. We're pretty close, great seats. And we're watching people file out to hit the bathroom, grab a t-shirt, take a piss or whatever. And I was like, oh my God. And Dana looked at me, he goes, we're fucked. Because we realized at that point, we had Fear No Evil in the can. But we realized that people they only want so much new music, and then they've had enough. So, I mean, it's kind of like they don't, Paul McCartney's done some great records. I just picked one up a couple of years ago that he did. And it's brilliant. And he's still Paul McCartney, and God bless him. But unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't put the money out towards good art. They don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I saw Paul McCartney not that long ago, and guy's in his 70s, he's almost 80, and he's still out there for like 3.5 hours. And he played a lot of songs, but he sure didn't play anything that I was going to consider new, because I think he's learned that. I want to get this question from the chat. Dan again asks, is there a different style of music you'd ever want to experiment with outside of rock and roll?
There is a tribute that I've done recently with Josh Egan. Josh and I went to high school together, and he was really good friends with Mark Craney, the drummer of Jethro Tull, as well as Gino Vanelli and Jimmy Haslip and Joe Vanelli. We've done 2 Gino Vanelli tracks that I played guitar on, one I sang on. And that was interesting for me because it's more of it's pop but it has really intricate guitar stuff. Carlos Rios played on it, and again, it's not the typical thing.
Yeah.
But I enjoy playing guitar. I enjoy, getting into technical things like that. But I can't do that within my band. I'm a front man in my band, and I can only do so much guitar playing without losing an audience because nobody cares. But I enjoy making the music. I enjoy doing that. And that's a key point. You got to understand, as an entertainer, you entertain. It's not like this is what I can do show. But I think that's my guilty pleasure that I've been doing lately.
And you mentioned Josh Egan. The last time I talked to you, I actually was with him, and you were talking about a project called Seven Angels. I was just sort of wanted a quick follow up on how that's been going for him, and if you've been staying in touch as he's been continuing to develop it.
Yeah, we did another track. And that one turned out great. And we're going to continue making music. We're just kind of volleyballing tracks through the internet. And hey, what if we write this? And what if we go here? And that's what we did on this track. And again, I'm more of a guitar player on that than a singer. And it's fun for me to just play. I love playing guitar. So it's been a nice experience to just sit back and do what I love to do when I'm home.
And then one last question I wanted to ask you. You're talking about going out on tour with Kiss as Slaughter's first thing. Did you know those guys before that? And most importantly, did you do your Gene Simmons impression before you got to go on tour with him, or did you develop it because you were around?
I developed it because Gene would come in and say, "Listen, you guys sounded really good. Make sure that you don't play too long because we don't want the show to run late." So all those things that of being around Gene, and there's a lot more colorful things that happened through that time. But it was good times. And I just actually, before we were doing this podcast, heard that my friend Gary Corbett, who's a keyboard player that plays with Kiss, he's got cancer, and I guess they're doing a GoFundMe page. So I would beg people to go out there and help Gary out a little bit. He's got a GoFundMe thing going, and it's a tough time. When you lose your health, you lose everything. So, I got to follow up with him and find out what's really going on.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously not something I plan to talk to you about, but I know that for musicians in general, any kind of health problems is always, there's that organization, Sweet Relief, that's been around for, 25, 30 years, and they've basically raised money for people who, it's like you're not necessarily in any kind of union. Like you're not going to automatically have some kind of health care. And I guess it's not something that we think about as fans of music, but obviously you guys out there, you have to be very much aware of I shouldn't have to spend, X amount of dollars a month on health insurance, but if I don't pay for it, I'm not covered,
Yeah. $800, $900 a month, it's a lot. And, there, and that's just, look, everybody has their cross to bear, so to speak. But, this is a good guy, talented musician, played with Cyndi Lauper, played with Cinderella, played with Kiss, and has done a lot of scrap metal shows with me, and has done recording with me. And, he's a dear friend, and it's hard to see somebody that is a dear friend go through such tough times, especially when, he doesn't have that at his disposal.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to bring in this last fan comment. Jackie says, "I love listening to Mark, whether he is singing or playing guitar, and hopefully you've enjoyed listening to him speak as well. It's always
that's very kind. Thank you.
It's always great to get a chance to talk to you. And as we were talking about the special edition box set of Slaughter's Fear No Evil, you can go to kissmywaxrecords.com, and one of the 500 is going to have that golden ticket, so you can spend your life with Slaughter, as they say. And well, Mark, it's always fun to just chat with you. And
same here, absolutely.
And honestly, I was glad to have an excuse to dive back into those records over the last couple of days because I hadn't listened in a while, and I'm like, oh my god, I forgot how much fun it is to just.
That's great. Thank you. You know what, man? I think that really where we're at is everybody's just, we've been through so much garbage in this pandemic. Yeah. If something makes you smile, that's a key point. And I think for for Dana and I was really how should I put it, exercising experience in the side of going through where we came from and listening to tracks and talking about the stories that we had both lived and, and I think that's an important thing. Music is the hourglass of our life. It just takes you back to what was happening at that time, and to revisit that and to put it in this highest, best form is great to be a part of that for sure.
Yeah, and that's why people can check slaughterusa.com and see when the band is coming to their town. And, I know you've done some shows post-pandemic, and I'm sure that people are just so excited to be back in front of music of any kind again. So the crowds are out there.
The show we just did in Houston was great, and it was just wonderful to see the crowd that vibrant and people so ready for it. I mean, it as somebody's been on lockdown for a year, like everybody else, it's kind of like, wow, man, it's just weird to see people together. But, you realize that's the magic in life is the togetherness of standing up for your brothers when they're not feeling well. And that's what life's about, so we appreciate everybody letting us go along with the ride with them.
Yeah, no, I've been to one show in the last year and a half, and it was a drive-in show. My friend's Kiss tribute band played at a parking lot at a minor league baseball stadium. But I'll tell you, everybody standing outside of their car, very distance apart from each other. Everybody was so excited just because look, there's music, it's right there, and
right.
Getting to be able to go places. And I was talking right before we started. Today's June 15th. That we're told that California, my state, is open again, so we'll see, and hopefully we get to see all sorts of music, and hopefully Slaughter finds their way out here.
Well, we had some things booked, but some of the casinos, I think they're kind of licking their wounds, so to speak, and pushing things a little later down the way because they're not, nobody knows what's really going to happen here. So
that's fair.
I think everybody's just trying to be safe, be smart, and make the right decisions for everybody's sake. I mean, for the audience, for the casinos, for us, and so let's just all try to be as safe as we can in the meantime, and enjoy life.
Absolutely. And if you're not going to see the band, go to kissmywaxrecords.com and get the box set of Fear No Evil. Thanks again, Mark. Always great to talk to you. Mark Slaughter of Slaughter. Thank you so much.